Welcome to the Who's Left podcast, a show about Indiana politics, history, and culture from the unapologetic perspective of the Hoosier Left. My name is Scott Aaron Rogers, and I'm recording from Bloomington. Here in these couple weeks after the May 7th Indiana primary, I've begun to turn my attention to the general election and to think about strategy. What should Democrats and the larger left be doing to win in November? Hopefully, with a sufficient mandate to actually exercise power on behalf of the people. I wrote a lengthy two-piece article a couple months ago on the stakes of the 2024 election at the federal level and told national Democrats how they should run this race. That's over on my Substack. The piece is called Heart Me Out. It's worth reading. I use the songs of classic rock band Heart as a narrative device, so there's lots of good tunes and some kind of cheesy ones along the way. But the gist is this. Democrats should highlight the conservative Project 2025 master plan, the roadmap to fascism as it's been called. And if you're not yet scared shitless about the prospect of any of that project being implemented, you should be. Read my piece, there's lots of great links in it, or read the great Substack by Andrew Watkins called How Project 2025 Will Ruin Your Life, and have a drink ready. In response, Democrats should offer their own comprehensive platform filled with aggressive, progressive policies that would put the final nail in the Reagan era of trickle-down neoliberalism. A New Deal. A left version of Contract with America. I like the name Freedom 250. Turns out the U.S. has a little birthday coming up in 2026. Who do you want planning that party? And it has the added bonus of sounding like the name of a NASCAR event, so maybe you pick off a few race fans, but if you come up with something catchier, I'm all ears. The final, most important part of my strategy is to run as a bloc. President Biden's personally unpopular. Other individual Democrats are unpopular. In down-ballot races, Democrats struggle to gain traction with little name recognition and even less money. The DNC is swimming in cash. Don't blow all that money trying to convince voters they love Joe Biden. Center the platform. Center the brand. The Republican brand is toxic. Advertise that. And it helps the whole ticket without having to send money to those down-ballot candidates, if you're stingy. But alas, the Biden campaign is not knocking down the door for my consulting services, and I'm afraid Indiana Democrats will once again be hung out to dry by the bigs in D.C. With those limitations, we've got a few options. For statewide and federal races, we can go all in on the cities and suburbs, the population centers. With the exception of 2018 and then the COVID year in 2020, voter turnout has been terrible in Indiana. Urban turnout has been even worse. There are a lot of Democratic voters out there in the cities that most likely feel hopeless in the face of rigged Republican rule. Can Democrats turn that tide this fall? They'll need to run up big numbers in the cities to overcome their deficit with rural voters, though there is hope in the increasingly Democratic suburbs too. But what about those rural voters? Another option is to find votes among this population Democrats have ignored for too long. Even as Republicans have increasingly dominated rural counties in the last couple decades, there are still would-be Democratic voters out there. They must feel even more hopeless in the face of rigged Republican rule, far too often having no candidate to represent them in local races. So, even if liberals manage to far outpace conservatives in the cities, maybe pick up a win in a statewide race here or there, Republicans will never give up their supermajority in the legislature when they run uncontested in large swaths of the state. I talked to Monroe County Deputy Chair for Rural Engagement, Ryan Still, about how the left can go about changing this dynamic in rural Indiana. In our conversation, we delved into the challenges of canvassing the countryside, overcoming stereotypes in both directions, and tying rural concerns to Democratic policy. We discussed the trust-building process and looked at some of the on the left who do well in this area. Finally, a question of strategy. Is it worth it? Should Democrats dedicate resources to rural outreach or focus all their efforts on turning out the base? But first, please consider supporting this project with a financial contribution. In 2022, in the wake of the corrupted Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade, I was furious on behalf of the women in my life in this state and across the country. The rushed special session of the General Assembly that summer was the first time I had participated in a political protest. I had spent my whole adult life squandering the privilege I have in this society as a straight white man. I knew I needed to do more, but wasn't quite sure what that looked like. I didn't know anybody in political circles, my time was consumed by work and family, so I started writing on Substack in what little spare time I had. I branched into campaign finance research, and I started this podcast, because the world needs more basic white guys with podcasts. Apparently it's some recessive trait among us. Who knew? But seriously, I know it is the unfortunate truth in this country that my voice as a cisgender hetero white guy is valued more than others, and I cannot waste that privilege any longer. Hoosiers and citizens of captured, gerrymandered, quote-unquote red states nationwide are disappointed, shocked, and horrified at the path our country has taken. And mad. We should be mad together. And turn our righteous fury into action. It's going to be a long, difficult road. We may never taste the fruits of our labor ourselves, but we put in the work so our children might. I knew this, and I knew long ago that 2024 was going to be an incredibly difficult year, but not in the way it's gone so far. My special guy, my 19-year-old son, passed away in January. My family continues to process the grief. His 16-year-old sister in particular is not coping well, fell in with a bad crowd, got up to no good, and is consequently spending an indeterminate amount of time with family out of state. So I don't mean to be flippant or dismissive because this is my own children I'm talking about here, but they are only 2 of 1.5 million Hoosier kids, our state's Republican supermajority, and their financial benefactors harm with bad policy. By allowing guns to flood our communities, by bullying queer youth, and by poisoning our environment, or building a Christian nationalist hellscape our kids will have to navigate. This year may have wounded me deeply, but I am determined to keep pushing. I will continue to work to highlight Indiana's bad actors so we can replace them with more empathetic leadership, and also shine the spotlight on the activists, organizations, and elected officials who are doing the hard work to build a more just, equitable, and compassionate Indiana for that next generation of Hoosiers. And obviously the Republicans are awful, but I'll take on Democrats too. When they put their donors over their voters, when they talk out of both sides of their mouths, and when they fail to push back against GOP authoritarian extremism with the necessary urgency and tenacity. Don't let red team, blue team politics cloud your judgment. If you can, help me out with a paid subscription at scottaaronrogers.substack.com. For $5 a month or $50 a year, you can help me push our state in a better direction, and maybe, if we reach critical mass, I can put down my tool belt and devote my full time to you, to this project, and to Indiana's future. I don't put anything behind a paywall, because, as author Sarah Kendzior says, it's not cool to paywall political content in a political crisis. I believe in open access to information, and your support helps make this knowledge freely available to all Hoosiers. So please, before the interview, if you have the means, pause right now, go to scottaaronrogers.substack.com, and subscribe at the paid level. And while the best way to help this project is a financial contribution, if you can't afford it at this time, you can still help. Subscribe at the free level over on Substack. Set your favorite podcast player to auto-download new episodes of the show. Rate and review the show on whatever platform you use. Follow me on social media at facebook.com/HoosLeft. That's HOOS left. I'm also on Blue Sky at the same handle. On Instagram, Threads, and Twitter, I'm at ScottRog78. That is SCOTTROG78. And on Mastodon at ScottRog78 at Hoosier.social. Full video episodes of the pod are now available on YouTube with clips on TikTok. The handle on both of those is at HoosLeft. Please subscribe on whichever platforms you use. But most importantly, share our message. Forward the articles to friends, family, and colleagues. Don't just like, but share on social media. Invite others to this community of Indiana leftists. Nobody is coming to save us. We've got to do it ourselves. To those who have joined this community already, especially those paid subscribers, you fill my heart, and I give you my sincere thanks. And to everyone, thanks for listening. Now here's my interview with Ryan Still. Ryan Still, welcome to the Who's Left podcast. Thanks for being here.
Oh, for sure. Love it.
So, first things first. Give us a little introduction. Tell the fine listeners about yourself.
Well, as said, I'm Ryan. Came from a small town near Muncie, Indiana. It's called Hartford City. No one ever knows it, so, near Muncie's fine. Grew up lower middle class when that was a thing. So, knew I had to, do something to go to college other than take on a lot of debt. So I joined the Army. Spent 5 years in the Army, 2 deployments, one to Afghanistan, one to Iraq. Came home, went to IU. When I was going to school here, I met my now wife and had 2 kids, a 3 and a 1-year-old, about to be 2 and 4, fun times. I started working at the Bloomington Housing Authority, right? So we do Section 8 vouchers for the community here, and have encouraged us to try to get more into outreach for homeless people, right? So we've gone out to a camp or 2, trying to get people to sign up for vouchers, and then recently we did a coordinated entry blitz, which is where you go and you go. We went to Shalom and got a bunch of people signed up for our vouchers, trying to get them housed. Political side of things, why I'm here, right? Done some campaign work. Jody Madera is the newest campaign I worked on. Before her, worked on Don Griffin for mayor and Ruben Marte for sheriff. We're in talks right now to start a PAC for young progressive people. With Sydney Zulich, Chrissy, right? A few people in town, Mia. And the reason I'm actually here, right, is rural outreach, right? So I'm the deputy, what is it? Deputy chair for rural outreach. I always forget titles, whatever. For the Monroe County Democratic Party. Through that, I've gone to a group, Dirt Road Organizing. They're ran by Canyon and Chloe out of Maine. They won an office that they really had no business winning. Not to phrase it negatively, right? But they did a great job and won in a spot that you would be surprised about, right? So now I'm taking that here, trying to get Monroe County and working with some surrounding areas as well to really get out there and try to get the rural voter.
Very good, very good. So, let's do a little exercise here. All right. So imagine with me, you and I, we're gonna hop in the truck and we're gonna go do some rural canvassing. Okay. So, what are some challenges that we're going to face before we even get to a one-on-one with the voter? This is a different animal than, canvassing in town, going into a subdivision, right?
Yeah, for sure. First issue that comes up is that truck, right? Transportation. A lot of the canvassers that we have here, at least in Monroe County, younger, and some don't have transportation. Some can't get out there, right? So you have to organize people in a way that they can even get to the location. Once you get to that point, right, you're going out there. Time, and this is an issue with convincing people to go to rural areas and canvass is it's not as quick. If you're in the city, you go knock on a door, right? They're next to each other, short walk. A lot of times with rural areas, you have to drive from house to house. Or if it's, on the verge of suburban or rural, you can you walk that, right? But you're still looking at a larger time commitment, and it's less efficient, which is something that campaigns always kind of strive to not do. You can get over that, though, right? So the efficiency deal. If you get a person who's designated as a driver, you can have that driver do calls as they're going, right? So you have someone who's doing call time while driving. You can have candidates do call time, right, while they're driving from house to house if it's a very large rural area.
Mm-hmm.
So there's ways to get over that inefficiency. And a third thing I've heard, possibly race, right? Where this is more like when you walk up to the door, like when you walk up. But a lot of people have become very uncomfortable with the idea of knocking rural areas, and I don't discount, right? There's some real concerns that can exist with that. So that one's there, and for sure something way to get over that, not get over it like that, but to mitigate that is to mix, like when you go, right? And I recommend this with genders as well, right? If you are going out and canvassing, you should never go out alone, first of all.
Right.
So I've always found it better working to have like male, female, right? If you're going canvassing or what have you, But the same, right? Like if you're going out as a black man and you're a little bit uncomfortable in a rural area, find someone who's rural and white who you think would get a better reception. And go with them. I'm not trying to discourage that, but we live in a world that kind of sucks sometimes. So you do what you can to help move it.
Well, and especially right now, things are especially polarized. So even if you're perfectly safe and everybody's going to be very friendly, you watch the news, you turn on the radio, whatever. Everybody's telling you, hey, we're polarized. People are at each other's throats. The right is especially violent right now. So it is understandable, certainly.
For sure.
But continuing our little exercise here, we get ourselves up over that. We go up the long driveway, knock on the door, ring the doorbell, whatever. So do Democrats run into challenges here, like just trying to open a dialogue? Are there misconceptions or stereotypes that, because we were talking about, maybe misconceptions that we would have about rural voters, right? And I'm sure that works the other way as well, right? Rural voters may have misconceptions about Democrats, right? Because like worst case scenario, I'm imagining like, Yosemite Sam with a shotgun making us dance off his property, calling us baby killers, right? Like tell me that this is just a misplaced fear rooted in my own ignorance.
Well, I'm happy to say that I can say that the worst case scenario, yeah, I've never had it be that bad. So hopefully that is entirely misplaced.
You've never been called a varmint?
No, no. I who are we explicit here? Can we?
Oh yeah, go ahead. You say whatever
Okay.
you want.
Worst thing I've had as far as rural outreach. We were at the Harrodsburg Heritage Days last week, and someone told me hell no walking by when I like smiled and waved at them politely. There was like hell no and just kept walking. You know what I mean? So you'll get a rude dismissal, but I've never had anyone, try to hurt me or look like they were going to. So to get into, the meat of the question there, it can be, right? There are absolutely misconceptions about us as well, that they hold about us as well as, we hold about them. So it can exist. The best way to combat that, I find, is to just find some common ground at all, like immediately, right? The first goal is to establish any sort of relation, agreement. It doesn't even have to be political. It could be like, one Don always did. He loved cars, right? So
Yeah.
he walked up to someone and he saw a car that was nice. He'd start talking about that car, and then they get that relationship. So then, at least moving forward, you're a human, right? You're a person.
Mm-hmm.
So it's harder to have a bad reaction when you're talking to a human being that you see as a human being. So it's very helpful. And I also find that while the discussion about how rural people view, our ideas, our politics, their ideas actually align with ours, right? If you think about what rural people will say, it's not, oh, no one should have any help, right? It's the idea like, yeah, people need help and we should offer that, right? It's helping your neighbor. That's a thought that comes out a lot. It's hard work. It's things like this, and those are ideas that align with what our party actually wants to do.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the party platform that we have, it's those things. It's that if you work hard, you should be able to have, food, shelter, all of the things. It's not something where we should dismiss everyone, and that's what we do as Democrats. That's what we want to do. So if you can take it to an idea level where you're talking about how people deserve these things, you usually can find common ground there. And then the actual worst case scenario that I run into fairly often is where they'll open with, well, what party are you? And that depresses me, even if they're a Democrat wanting a Democrat answer, right? Because that shows that there's not any really work to be done there. They're going to vote for or against you based on your party, and that's kind of it. There's ways to work around that. You can still try to find that common ground. Then you can, and it can still work. But when they open up with that, what party are you? It's at least very, very, very more difficult to work there.
It sounds like, like they've already got a preconceived notion, and you're trying to put you in a box right before you even start. I want to say, even if you have that interaction, right? Like as a canvasser, you go up to somebody's house and like they ask, all right, Republican or Democrat, and you're like, I'm a Democrat, and they're like, no thanks, bye. It's been real. That's at least valuable in some way, right? Like, you got that data, you could put it in the van, and you don't have to maybe hit that house next time, or put it on the back burner or something, right?
Yeah, for sure. You can pull data, and it's definitely worth doing. Yeah, there's the practical notion of that, and you're right. I always ideologically, I'm kind of an idealist, right? Like I always want to do more, and I think that we can do more. So, but I agree.
Like, yeah, you're. I'm gonna be the one, and I'm gonna turn Bubba into a hardcore.
Yeah, yeah. I'm a dreamer. You know what I mean? Like I can't turn it off.
Well, so in your conversations here, you've been doing this, so okay, maybe we've overcome some of the initial hesitation. We're on the porch, we're having a good conversation. We're talking about the car, we're talking about the flowers. Maybe we're dancing around some of the political stuff without getting into the real heavy stuff. What are the issues that come up again and again and again when you're talking to rural voters?
They're similar. They're similar. We all have pretty similar concerns here. Cost of living, huge, comes out all the time. Housing, especially in Monroe County specifically, even out in the county, housing is expensive and everyone knows it. That is a huge deal for everyone. When you get to like a wider level of politics, abortion comes up all the time, good or bad. There are plenty of rural people, and the data shows that it's about like 60% in southern Indiana that would support some type of access to abortion. So realistically, it comes up. But a lot of the times it is that, we should have this right. We should have this access. So those are like the three biggest that I come up with that I hear all the time.
Wow, that's maybe a little bit unusual. I mean, we all hear the numbers and know that abortion's a big issue, but we also maybe it's one of those things where we tend to have preconceived notions, right? You're like, okay, I'm out in the rural area. This is pro-life country. This is no exceptions country, and yet you find it's a freedom issue, right?
Absolutely.
And from the bluest to the reddest areas, most Hoosiers and most people in the country still favor freedom, right?
Absolutely.
So, we're finding the common ground. We're out there talking and getting to meet people. And, now you got to thread that needle, though, right? So how do Democrats take those concerns, those issues, and effectively connect them to Democratic Party positions, right? Are there issues where it's easier to do this? Because I'm guessing my preconceived notion is, okay, economic issues. Maybe that's some place where we're going to have more success than social issues, right? Now, we talked about the one big one, but are there effective ways to message around those too?
There are. So when you're talking about how to take an idea or like that initial conversation into a policy platform idea, the best way to do that is to be personal. Most people that get involved in politics are doing things outside of politics. As I mentioned, I work at the housing authority. This often comes up. People have awful notions of like the people that receive assistance, but I can usually kind of dissuade that, right? Because I work there. Most people that I assist with housing have jobs, plural, and are struggling to keep themselves and their families fed and housed. And when you kind of translate that into like, we as Democrats want to support this type of program where people that do have these jobs or people that are disabled or old on Social Security can continue to live and deserve to continue to live. You can take it from that idea section, which we can find common ground on, to a policy section of like these programs we should support, right? You find that good transition. Tim Peck, who is running for Indiana's 9th, right? Mm-hmm. He has a good example of on abortion. So he's a doctor, right? Emergency doctor. And he'll talk about when he's had to perform operations that wind up with the death of the baby or the fetus or what have you. his line is, we've never thought about what the government has to say in those moments, right? It's a personal decision between the doctor and the patient, right? And they're making this extraordinary, difficult decision, and they don't really need the government to be like, yes, you can, no, you can't, to this specific thing. So you can take your personal thing, right? With Tim, it's being a doctor in this scenario, and then convert that to, this is a policy that we don't need, right? That anti-abortion, like, we shouldn't be pushing this because it's not something the government needs to be in.
Yeah, exactly. So you get freedom issue, yeah, right? So, well, what about on economic stuff? Right, we talked about, you know, the jobs and the housing a little bit, but, you know, to zoom out a little bit to like just like major overarching economic policy, right? Corporate consolidation, trickle down, neoliberalism, you know, 40 years of, almost 50 years now of those policies have hit rural areas particularly hard, right? Monopoly concentration, like your seed companies, your fertilizer companies, your your food processing, you know, conglomerates on the other end where you're going to sell your product if you're a farmer, right? Those policies have hurt rural areas as much as they've hurt the inner city, right? So, you know, are you finding any success talking about things in that way?
Absolutely. You can, a common thing, you walk up, you begin to talk about something, you know, economic wise, and they'll bring up, like, you know, taxes, you know, liberals want to tax too much, or liberals spend too much. And at this point, it's fairly easy to say, well, there's not really a conservative financial party anymore. You know, conservatives spend just as much, you know, they tax the common people just as much.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, you know, that's a place to start, although confronting usually doesn't work well. So where I usually go, I always talk about corporate greed.
Mm-hmm.
An easy example, an easy local example is Duke Energy.
Yep.
They are raising prices again and again and again, and it doesn't stop. And while they're raising prices, they're seeing, you know, higher and higher net profits. I don't mean gross profits where they're just making more money, but they're also spending more. They're seeing higher net profits as they keep raising prices and saying, well, this is due to inflation. This is due to... But if it's due to inflation, then you'd see the same or around the same net profit, but they're not. They're seeing higher net. You know, so you can kind of lay out these examples of, you can argue that, you know, this is all the liberal progressive fault, but we haven't had that power to determine this, right? The policies in place have been to encourage this type of corporate greed, where they continually make more and more money. And it's not the enemy isn't this type of, you know, regulation. It isn't saying, hey, it's the government doing this. It's corporations that are continually seeking profits over people.
I always come back to this again and again and again, that the right and the left are really both mad at the same people, right? It's the corporations, and the left knows the corporations are the greedy bastards, right? And the right hates the government. And it turns out the corporations have essentially taken over the government, right? You know, the right's mad at the government, the left is mad at corporations, and it turns out the corporations have essentially taken over the government, right? And that's the needle that we on the left here, I think, have a hard time threading to get people to latch on to that, you know?
Yeah, and you can, when talking to people, they often don't drop the idea that the government is the, you know, a problem. But it's not hard to convince someone that the corporations are not doing good for you. You know, like, it's not hard to say, yeah, you can point to an example like Dugabay. They're not helping, and you can direct that. So
Yeah, and then in the last couple of years, it's weird how some on the right have managed to frame the corporate class as somehow the left, right? Like you hear woke corporations, or like my favorite one is like communist corporations. Like those are literally the opposite.
it's wild. I don't know. I don't like my corporations to be political at all, personally. So when I see like the woke corporation stuff, I'm like, just stop. You're not a person. Like I view it as them trying to capitalize on people caring about stuff, and I don't.
Yes, it's all PR, right? They don't believe it. Corporations don't have any guiding principles other than deliver profit.
Yeah. So I'm not saying I dislike woke corporate. I hate when corporations try to take a side. Just make your product and try to not be a shithead. But
So back to our little scenario here. Well, let's we had a good interaction, got some successful canvassing, maybe changed a couple hearts, or at least opened them up a little bit. How can Democratic campaigns build relationships and trust with rural communities, for long-term engagement?
So in the scenario, we've talked to a person. They've kind of gotten with us. They hopefully have gone from, for sure, strong opposition to maybe lean opposition or maybe neutrality. I wouldn't expect someone to entirely flip on one meeting. But that's the start. You have to be consistent. This isn't something that you can just go out once, during an election and then not ever talk to the person again, because that's not what you're looking for. If we want to do things like, for me, I want to flip Indiana's ninth. That's like my goal, right? This is a long-term thing. This is a thing where you continue to go out there. And this is something where they have to see someone regularly. And it can be on election cycles, because realistically, we're human beings that have jobs and, we have to do things. But as long as we continue to field candidates that are doing the work and going to these rural areas, talking to people and showing that, no, we're actually human beings that are here for your best interests. We're here because we want to represent you in a way that is helpful to you. That over time will work. A second part of this, right, is the idea to build community. So we have to talk to people consistently and then get people who do agree with us in their locality to want to be around each other and to want to say, hi, I'm a Democrat. They have to have, for lack of a better words, they have to be able to come out as a Democrat, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have to make it to where it's not a dirty word, to where you see your neighbor and they may have that Democrat sign in their yard and it's not shameful, right? Maybe you still disagree with it. But, the person 2 houses down is also a Democrat, but they just don't talk about it. Or the person, 2 houses down would vote Democrat, but think, oh, it's pointless. No one here is going to do it. They see that yard sign, they see people going to events with Democrats, and then they build that idea of, okay, actually, it is worth going out. There are people here that agree with me and we can do things together.
I think the first thing you said there is really important. It's about we have to field candidates, right? And so much of the problem in Indiana, but other states as well, is that Democrats have largely abandoned a lot of these rural races. They'll concede these gerrymandered districts and not put up a fight. And it's hard to build trust if you're not around at all.
Yeah. Impossible.
And you go ahead.
It's impossible to build trust when you're not around at all. And it's also foolish to not be around at all, because in areas where there is no work done, if you were to field a Democratic candidate and not even have them talk to a single rural person, you still get, 33% of the vote is Democrats all the time, right? But for the Democrat a lot of the time. So they exist. Even a group that is completely ignored and no outreach is done at all, there's still around 33% that vote for that party or that candidate. It's not worth ignoring, because you don't even have to outright win it. You don't have to go in every rural county and get over 50%. But if you go to every rural spot and you get, 40, 45%, if you make it competitive there, and then you pull the cities with 50, 55%, right? 55, 60%, you can win. You can win a race that includes both areas.
And another thing just about showing up, this is something I talked about with Jess Piper out in Missouri, is, yeah, sure, maybe right now rural Democrats aren't going to win races. Maybe we're working on pushing from 33 to 35 or 40, right? Just making it closer. But one, like you said, you're building relationships, you're building trust, maybe for the next cycle. But also, those are votes for up the ticket. A vote for a Democratic candidate in a rural race might not win that race, but it's another vote for Jennifer McCormick, right? It's another vote for Valerie McRae. It's another vote for Joe Biden. And so, those votes still go to the overall total. So it's very important to get them wherever we can. You're part of a team. You might move the ball forward a little bit in your own race, but you still scored some points for the top of the ticket there. So as I was doing a little prep for our interview here, I noted an interesting contradiction. There was an article from the American Academy of Political and Social Science. Quote, rural dwellers tend to prize community spirit and civic involvement, embracing a Tocquevillian or communitarian conception of democracy. And they have strong ties to the place where they live. Yet recently, as evidenced by the 2020 American National Elections Studies, they appear to be less tied to liberal democratic values than urbanites. According to their analysis, they were much more likely to favor restrictions on the press, for example, and to suggest it would be helpful if the president could unilaterally work on the country's problems without paying attention to the Congress or the courts, end quote. So I read that, and I see a group committed to democratic ideals, like within the small community, right? You're talking about helping your neighbors and whatnot. But with authoritarian inclinations toward others, right? The out-group. That sounds very Volkish, like in the German sense, like you take care of one another inside your group. Is this as simple as a race issue? Are there local community organizations that might better mobilize rural voters, in their little groups?
Well, so is it as simple as race? It's not as simple as race, right? It can be a factor. It's pretty much how it always is, right? It's always present. So and I want to acknowledge the frustration that even I have, right? As someone, I'm now 29, right? I was born in 1995. People that grew up in my generation haven't seen a truly functional government as far as like interactions between Congress and executive branch and the judicial branch. And if you're younger than me, it's even worse, right? Because you could argue, for some effective government from, the 2000s. But when you see that, when that's all you see, going to something like authoritarian, it's never the answer, but it can appear to be. You know what I mean? Like it's the type of thing where if you never see people work well together to come together and help people, you're going to think, well, this person wants to help me, just let them do whatever they want, even if that's incorrect. And the cure for that, I think, is better governance. You know what I mean? Like it's one of those things where like the cure is going to be hard to get to because we have the problem of getting there, because we have to win those elections to get to a point to where we can actually govern better. So, you know, I'm not saying it's right by any means, because it's not. It's wrong, specifically wrong. But I'm here organizing democratically. But when I hear people say, like, you know, well, Congress never gets anything done, I'm like, yeah, you know, like how am I going to argue against that? Like, so I wish they would do more, I guess.
Yeah, it might be the wrong sentiment, but you certainly understand where that sentiment comes from.
Yeah. They've seen a problem and they have a different cure than I have, right? Which is bad, but fixable. Are there communities that are better for mobilizing more voters? Yes. Local, rural people. The best thing that you can do, let's say that you're a rural person listening to this right now, wanting to get involved, is get involved. Show your neighbors that you're here, that you and your neighbors can, if you disagree, reasonably disagree. Show them that you're not a baby killer, which, you know, it's things that people say. So show them that you're a human being, that you have a disagreement, or that you agree with them and that they need to come out and vote. And to do that, all you have to do is contact, you know, me, a campaign that you like, a candidate that you like, and really get involved, because that's how you cure this. That's how it gets to a point where we can actually field candidates and politicians that will help people and have them at heart.
Well, okay, let's say there's not a campaign or a candidate that you particularly like, and you're, you know, out in the rural areas, and you're a Democrat, and you know, maybe you're afraid to put your hand up or, you know, put that sign out. Who do you contact there? You know, you go to your local party. You reach out to someone at the state, say, hey, look, I know I'm not alone out here. I might feel alone out here, but I know there's, you know, more of us. How can we sort of help build a critical mass where my neighbors aren't afraid to say, hey, I'm also a Democrat?
Yeah. My favorite answer would be to run, if you're that person. To run for office. I know that's not reasonable for everyone, right? You know, not everyone has the time or the money or the ability to do that. But if you can, please do. It's great to be involved that way. If that isn't an option, that's fine. Your local party should be able to help you. There should be a local Democratic Party everywhere, even if it's just a few people. But no one person is just one person. Everyone you talk to, everyone who like thinks about getting involved, for everyone that thinks about getting involved, there are more people thinking the same thing. There are more people that are wondering, should I do this? Should I get involved? Can my voice matter? And yes. And if you're hearing this, or if you're, you know, talking with your neighbors, if you decide to take that jump, encourage the people next to you to take that jump as well. And then that's how you get to that, right? You start a movement or a momentum that can carry you forward. And it's by action. It's by showing up and acting. And you know what? If you
and no one's alone, right? I mean, we all have our... Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, if you don't have a local party, you can contact me. My email exists out there. I will just find someone for you to get in touch with. Because I will. That, you know what I mean? Like there will be someone, and I have you know the knowledge to connect people where I know where things are. So I will at the very least do that, if nothing else.
Right, and you know, you might not be super friendly with your neighbors or whatever out there. You might not know where to find other people who are like-minded, but no one's truly alone. We all have our networks and our families and people we can draw on. Um, and reach out from there, right? You might not know that you're 2 degrees from someone that could like really help. And it's just about taking that leap, right? So one of the hurdles with reaching rural voters, I think, is that conservative, older, and rural voters have been bombarded with misinformation. You've got your TV outlets, your Fox News, and all those, and just thousands nationwide of right-wing radio stations, and these are often the only source of local information in these towns. Like, you're gonna get your high school sports and your weather report, and also hate speech. And then in addition to all that, we've got all the foreign influence operations. The Russians, the Chinese, and the Iranians are trying to hype up divisions within our country on social media and whatever. How can the left use technology or social media to overcome such a huge disparity there?
So this is a part I'm going to say I wish I had a better answer. When it gets to just such a national and international style of issue, I don't know. I wish I had a better answer. But the answer that I do have for us as individuals, right, is to make yourself a human. You know what I mean? Go and talk to people that are being bombarded with this and make yourself a person to them. Hey, I am a human. I'm not this generalization. And then the next time they hear that generalization, right, they might think, they say everyone who likes abortion is just a, baby eating monster. But I know that, Ryan over there, he seems like a nice person who wants to help, And even if they are not going to completely change their mind on that, then they have a point of reference for someone who holds opinions different from their own and is not bad. It's just what we can do locally to combat that. Again, I wish I had an answer for a national thing that could do it, but sad.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's the nature of left versus right in a way, right? I mean, the right by definition is always going to be better resourced and have the means for mass media operations, whereas democracy is often, face to face, person to person, a very infectious sort of thing in a good way.
Yeah.
Is there anybody that you can point to? Maybe it's somebody here locally, maybe it's somebody in the state or someone nationally. Maybe you got a few people you'd like to point out, but who's doing this well as a Democrat? Who, are there campaigns or organizations that are successfully engaging rural voters as Democrats? Who should we look to for lessons?
Oh, absolutely. I'm going to represent Dirt Road Organizing here because they do wonderful work. Right now, so for reference, right, that's Chloe and Canyon, right? They have a book. It's called Dirt Road Revival, and they have a group called Dirt Road Organizing where they get local political activists of all stripes from everywhere in the United States, right? So people working on issues all over the place. The cohort I was a part of had people from California, Alabama, Maine, Montana, just everywhere you can imagine. And there are people everywhere doing this good work. And it is Democrats, right? And then it's also independents, it's progressives, it's liberals that are pushing for positive change. So individuals, right? Chloe and Canyon did great work in Maine. There's people in Montana, I wish I could think of the campaign names right now. I should have wrote that down.
Well, I know,
But
like in Montana, the Senator John Tester does a great job. He's got a race share.
yeah, but he's held on to that, and he's always represented well. So I will continue to believe
Mm-hmm.
in John out there. But I'm speaking even of House rep races, right? Where you hear about
Mm-hmm.
these people that are driving, hours across the state just to knock on people's doors, just to really get and talk to people, and that's fantastic. The people that I've met there have absolutely made me feel that locally we are not alone. There are people everywhere doing this work and doing it wonderfully. Locally, right here in Monroe County or Southern Indiana, you have Tim Peck, who's doing a really good job of actually going to rural areas, which is absolutely what you need to do when you're talking about Indiana's 9th district, right? You have your Cornerstone and Bloomington. Now you have New Albany, right? You have the areas around Louisville and Cincinnati that are part of that 9th district now that have Democratic institutions at this point, have mayors, city council people that are Democrats. And you're going to pull those votes. And if you can just pull a reasonable amount of people from these rural areas, you will win that, right? It's not something that's so far off in the future that it's unrealistic and we'll never see it. It's something that we could see. So if you do go to these areas and inspire these people, then you can actually win. And he's doing a good job of that. Even more, like coming in more locally, Thomas Horrocks, great candidate. Every time I'm at a rural, anything here, he's there. He's doing his best, and he also has a very good chance to flip that district. And then in Northern County, Michelle Higgs doing an amazing job. She's organized a rural summit, right? So we have people all over Southern Indiana that are running for House districts for the state. We're all in communications, and we're setting up rural summits now, right? Where we're going to go out and try to consolidate and meet together with a bunch of people and show that we have a presence here, and we have a presence that is here to help. So there are a lot of people working and doing great work, even here locally in Southern Indiana, and it's wonderful to see.
It's wonderful to hear too. So this last question I got for you here is kind of philosophical, and you hit at it a little bit when you were talking about Dr. Peck's campaign and how we've got Bloomington and New Albany, Clarksville, the Indiana side of the Louisville metro area, right, and then down toward Cincinnati where you have a little bit more of suburban populations, right? I've seen statistics that only like 14% of Hoosiers live in strictly rural counties, and maybe another 20% or so live in the mixed counties where, the largest town is maybe like 30,000 people. So, tops. We're looking at like a third of the state. Meanwhile, 2/3 of us live in, urban metro areas or suburbs. If I'm a statewide candidate like Dr. McCormick or Dr. McCrae, and I'm looking to get the best bang for my buck, why am I not staying in Bloomington and New Albany and those communities and just doubling down and trying to get as many votes as I can there? I get, is it worth it to even visit the rural areas?
So absolutely. And I can kind of separate this into two sides, right? Practically, even so the first part is even cynical, right? You have to be seen to do this, right? So, politics it's also a lot about image. It's unfortunate, but that's life, right? And if you are running as a statewide candidate or a congressional candidate, right, you can't not go to rural areas, because people will notice that you haven't entered a rural area at all and will not have faith that you can actually, pull the election. Now, less cynically, but still practical, to win the larger race, you don't have to win the rural districts. You don't have to win all of the rural area. You just have to pull 40, 50, 40, 45, all that %. And that's going to actually help you. That is something that if you go to these areas and you pull this, that %, it's going to help a lot. You're going to get that 60 plus % out of city areas or urban areas. And that's nice.
Mm-hmm.
But if that was going to do it, it would have done it, right? We would have Democratic governors and senators, right? So that's not doing it. It just isn't. So you have to go to these areas. You have to go to rural areas, and you have to pull that extra 10 or 12% there and be seen doing that. A switch to a moral answer, right? Or an ethical answer. I go back to, I'm a history, political science major. I'm a nerd for that stuff, right? Before the French Revolution, after the French Revolution, there was a statement that you can't be the leader of two peoples. And there they were talking about far left, the far right. You can't just lead one of them. You can't be like, well, I'm here for the monarchist in that scenario. So in this scenario, you can't be, or you shouldn't be, a leader of just urban people ignoring everyone out in rural area. Morally, ethically, it's wrong. It's wrong, and it's not going to work well for anyone. Also, morally, where rural people are in large part voting against their own interests, voting for Republicans most of the time. They're voting for people that don't actually have any interest in helping them and are just using a lot of issues to expand ideas that are going to actually hurt them, and they deserve better, right? So I would make that as the moral argument. It is the right thing to do. And there's also practical reasons to go as well. So both sides exist there. And a note to like statewide or federal style campaigns, if you're running this, you oftentimes personally wouldn't go to a lot of rural areas other than like once or twice, but setting up a local unit there, right? A local group that is actually going to do that local work is definitely the way to go. So you have that presence, and then you can make that visit or two, right? Because you have to see everywhere in the state. It's a huge task. You can't be upset that they only came to, your town once or twice. That just makes sense. So yeah, that's
sure. So you might not spend all your time there, but you at least have to show up occasionally.
Absolutely. And you should have your local supporters actively doing outreach for you. It should be both, right? You should have a presence there, but it's also just understandable that you don't have time to go to every city in Indiana multiple times. It's just not feasible.
So, Ryan, what did I miss? Is there anything I glossed over that you think we should really be talking about in terms of rural engagement, or reaching out to rural voters, or just anything I forgot?
There's nothing missed, but there's something that I would really just like to emphasize, and that is to do the work, to go to these areas and talk to people, to do that. And I know I'm probably sounding like a broken record, but that's because of the importance of this message, right? I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think that this was essential. We are living in a divided United States, right? It's pretty clear we have pretty sharp divisions. We need to fix that, right? We have to. That we can't live like that. So it's time, right? It's time to get out there. It's time to show that we're all, people that may disagree, and that is fine. That's why I do what I do on the rural side of things, right? It's something that needs fixed.
Yeah, we all have a lot more in common um, than we do what separates us. It's just that certain people are very invested in making sure that we're fighting over a certain set of issues and not another set of issues on which we may be aligned.
Oh, for sure. And that's been that way forever. But it's only gotten more effective with social media, with, our siloed off communications. It's much easier now to paint
Yeah,
everyone as completely separate when it's just not true. There's so much that unites us, and that is exactly what we have to do. We have to look at that and decide to unite, right? It's a decision. It's something that you have to face and come to.
well, that's a little hopeful ending there for us today. Ryan, where can people learn more about you, what you do, and your organization there?
Dirt Road Organizing. It's dirtroadorganizing.org, right? If you want to look at what they're doing a lot of good work. We're gonna have a website up soon for the rural summits, right? So I would love to see a bunch of people show up for that. That is one of my biggest hopes for really getting out there. So whenever that comes out, I guess I'll send it to you, Scott, and hopefully you can put it somewhere. Sorry, it's just
Yeah, and
some work in
I'll link
progress.
that website in the show notes here for sure. And if we have a date on any of those rural summits, I'll include that as well.
Yeah, and then if you want to get involved, you can contact me. Can I give my email? Is that insane if I just give my email?
Please. Go ahead.
Okay. Ryan period still 9@gmail.com. I am just a human, so you can contact me. I'm nothing special, and I'll get you to any resource you need. You can contact the party, even Monroe County Democratic Party. If you go to their website, there's surely something there that you could volunteer for. Look up candidates, see what candidate you particularly like. There'll probably be one, and volunteer for them. I have found that doing this work is extremely rewarding. I feel much more in touch with the community generally, and the people around me specifically. So it's worth getting involved.
All right. Very good. Fantastic closing words. Ryan Still, thank you so much for joining the Who's Left podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me. And thanks for doing the work in general, right? Like, I love it.
I appreciate it. Once again, that was the Monroe County Democratic Party's Deputy Chair for Rural Engagement, Ryan Still. So, toward the end there, we talked about something I asked in the introduction. Is it worth it for Democrats in Indiana, or anywhere in the country for that matter, to invest resources in rural outreach when, on a purely cynical analytics crunch the numbers level, it might be a better value to focus on urban and suburban areas where, if nothing else, contacting voters is certainly more efficient. But what do you mean by worth it? In dollars and cents? Maybe. Probably not. That's the cold, dispassionate bet Democrats have consistently made in recent years. But in hearts and minds? Now that's priceless. The seed of democracy lies dormant in many rural areas. But it will eventually bear fruit if you come back to water it regularly. Ryan mentioned the trope about white rural Americans voting against their best interests. And this is true to an extent. Again, thinking in purely cynical economic terms, Democrats do offer better policies for working class people, urban or rural. But only marginally. I mean, sure, they might have tried to file down some of the sharp edges, but Democratic economic policy was basically Diet Reagan. When Democrats embraced neoliberalism under Bill Clinton, they essentially gave up any economic difference with Republicans. The hatred rural folk have for NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement that went into effect in 1994, cannot be understated. And while that agreement was negotiated and signed by Daddy Bush, it got pinned on Clinton, ruining the family brand and the Democratic brand for decades among rural Americans. Now, make no mistake, it was the economic libertarian free market fundamentalist right that gave us trickle-down, gave us NAFTA, gave us hollowed-out rural America dominated by just a few big players. But they also gave us someone to blame. They gave us a story, and they repeated it again and again and again. It really is quite a thing to behold, how the capitalist class managed to leave the coalition consisting largely of the young, the marginalized, and the student loan-saddled managerial class holding the bag when the backlash to all-out capitalism came. Just like, bravo, chef's kiss. Brilliantly evil, perfectly executed divide and conquer strategy. Game, respect, game. Democrats have, until very recently, had no game. Or rather, too many cashed out any credibility or moral consistency they had for a chance to play capitalism roulette, only to find the House wins every time. They sold our social democratic economic principles to play an unwinnable game. Democrats quit offering much of any worth to rural voters. The wealthy few have everything. They set the terms of the debate. They determine what we fight about. And while we argue over who's human, who deserves rights, and who gets to live with dignity, correct answer, everybody over the age of born, they make off with literally all of our dying planet's remaining resources. Minority and underserved populations constitute a massive portion of the Democratic Party base. Rural voters are an underserved population. They should be a part of the Democratic coalition, and historically, until the last 50 years or so, were. So it is our job, for us political sickos out here, to change the terms of the debate. To quit fighting a culture war and start fighting a class war. All of us, urban, rural, and everywhere in between, united against authoritarians and oligarchs. It's worth it. Thanks for listening. Thank you to my guest today, Ryan Still. You can find him on LinkedIn or email him at ryan.still9@gmail.com. As for yours truly, you can find me on Facebook, Blue Sky, YouTube, and TikTok at HoosLeft, and on most other social media sites at ScottRodge78. If you want to send me a message, slide in my DMs on social media. Do the kids still say that? Or email me at scottrod78@gmail.com. if you haven't yet, when you're finished here, please go to scottaaronrogers.substack.com and subscribe at that paid level. Help me keep this project going. Until next time, this has been the Who's Left podcast. I'm Scott Aaron Rogers. Love each other, Indiana.